don't try to persuade other countries to use the policies that Korea and Japan used, because they are the exceptions. And the US, before the Britain, France, Germany, everyone that has become rich did it through free trade, free market policies. But the truth is that starting with 18th century Britain, virtually all of today's rich countries developed their economies by using policies like protectionism, regulation of foreign direct investment, government subsidies, state-owned enterprises, lax imposition of intellectual property rights. And it all starts with this man. Until the 17th century, Britain was a backward economy dependent on raw wool exports to the Low Countries, or what are the Netherlands and Belgium today, especially Flanders in Belgium. These countries are actually at the time the high-tech manufacturing centers of Europe, because at the time the most high-tech industry was woolen manufacturing, making clothes from sheep's wool. And Britain grew a lot of sheep, but it didn't have the necessary technologies to process them into textiles, so it exported the raw material to those countries. And we all know how raw material producers get the raw deal, because they get only very small slice of the final value. So when this man, Robert Walpole, the so-called first prime minister of Britain, actually he was called chief minister, but he was effectively the first prime minister, so that we call him the first prime minister. When this man came to power in 1721, he introduced a raft of policies in order to promote the British industries, especially woolen manufacturing industries. I don't have time to go into the details, but if you actually look at the history of the time, I was actually shocked to find this. A lot of policies that I thought were invented by the Japanese government officials in the 1950s, they were invented either by Walpole or invented even before him, and then kind of seriously magnified and implemented by Walpole. So that if you look at the policies that Walpole's government used to promote British manufacturing, they are very similar to what have become known as the East Asian industrial policy. And between Walpole's policy reform and the mid 19th century, actually the turning point was the 1950s. The data are sparse for the earlier period, so you cannot quite see it here, but basically between the early 18th century, when Walpole introduced all those policies, and the 1850s, Britain was literally the most protected nation in the world. So it was on the basis of this history that Friedrich List, the 19th century German economist, accused Britain of kicking away the ladder. So what is he saying in this quote? He's saying, look, Britain keeps telling us, the Germans and the Americans, to use free trade. But when did Britain use free trade? Only after it became the supreme manufacturing nation. So Britain preaching free trade, despite the fact that it developed its own economy through protectionist policies, is like someone climbing up to the top and kicking, using a ladder and kicking the ladder away so that others cannot follow.